These are general characteristics of early modern English poetry. We'll be looking at examples from Sir Thomas Wyatt the Elder and Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey. Early modern English verse is characterized as accentual syllabic, which means that there are a fixed number of stressed syllables, or accents, and a fixed number of overall syllables, stressed and unstressed. For example, the word party has 2 syllables and 1 accent. Party, 2 syllables. Par is where we stress. That's the accent. Party, 1 accent. Early modern English poetry is also presented usually in regular groupings. We call those stanzas. It's often end-rhymed. That is, the last sound of a line matches the last sound of another line. The poetry is grammatically complete. It includes a subject and a predicate. Either a subject with an intransitive verb like I grieve, where there's no object, or a subject with a verb and an object. You see me. You is the subject, see is the verb, the object is me. There is some variation in syntax, that is word order, and the poetic effect achieved in deviations from or in hyperregularity of pattern is part of what makes the poetry delightful. Let's talk about accents and syllables. As I mentioned, accentual syllabic is the label we use to characterize early modern English poetry. There are a number of syllables and accents per line that are fixed. Syllables refer to all syllables in a given line, whether they are stressed or not, and the accents are the stressed syllables. Even the word accent has only 1 stress in it, only 1 accent in it. A foot is a pattern of stress and unstressed syllables together. The foot, and we'll talk about this in a bit, a foot is the basic unit of measurement for a line of poetry, so that multiple feet are separated by vertical lines in this slideshow. For example, roses is a foot, and are red is a foot, and the vertical line divides the 2 feet from each other. English poetry is mainly disyllabic. That is, each foot has 2 syllables in it. Usually, that's mainly the case. So roses has 2 syllables, are red has 2 syllables. English poetry uses mainly the iamb, that is an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. For example, on wisdom's path delight, where unstressed stressed, unstressed stressed, unstressed stressed is the pattern. Common types of iambic meter include dimeter, that's 2 feet of iambs, trimeter, 3 feet of iambs, and actually our example in the second point about feet, roses are red, is a dimeter pattern. The on wisdom's path delight is a trimeter pattern. Tetrameter, 4 feet of iambs. This is a very common pattern in English poetry. We'll see some of it. Pentameter, also a very common pattern in English poetry. In fact, the examples I'll be using today are in pentameter. Hexameter, 6 feet of iambs. Sometimes it's called an alexandrine. And the poem that we have from Sidney is an example of an alexandrine. Heptameter, 7 feet of iamb, sometimes called a 14er because it has 14 syllables in it. We won't be looking at very many 14ers in this class. Octameter, that I can think of, there are no octameter poems in this class, but it would be 8 feet of iambs, and it is something that one could find in early modern English poetry. Other types of disyllabic feet include trochee. The word helpful is a trochee, so that is not an iamb. The stress comes on the first word. A spondee, handgun, that has the stress on both syllables. Now there's a little bit of drop off in handgun. Still, there's enough stress on each syllable that they would stand out in a line. There's also something called a pyrrhic or a dibrach, unstressed, unstressed. And the, when, who, so are words that could function as dibrachs. Stanzas are lines separated into groups. Usually it's a fixed count. Here are some common stanza types. 3 lines per stanza we would call a tercet, 4 lines a quatrain, 5 lines a quintain, 6 lines a sestet, 8 lines an octave, 14 lines a sonnet. Other groupings may be described. For example, you could describe the Sir Thomas Wyatt the Elder's poem as a 10-line stanza. So it doesn't have to have a single word like a decade or something like that. You can be as wordy in your descriptions as you need to be, as long as a description is being offered. There are some situations without stanzas. Continuous rhymed couplets. We call these heroic couplets. John Milton's, not John Milton, some of Chaucer's poetry would be in heroic couplets. This is the AABBCC pattern. Wife of Bath's prologue and tale are rhymed couplets. We'll have that reading. We've had that reading already. We could also have repeated unrhymed patterns, and this would characterize Milton's Paradise Lost. This is called blank verse. The rhymes are not rhymed, but there is an iambic pentameter pattern, a ba-dum, 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 ba-dum pattern in the way the words are recited. Rhyme refers to the last sound of a line matching the last sound of another line. Those matched sounds can vary in position. We usually use letters to identify the rhymed lines. A rhymes with A, B rhymes with B, and so on. X can mark a line where there is a word that doesn't fit a rhyme scheme. Here are some common rhyme schemes. Couplets, A, B, B, C, C. The poetry we'll be looking at today is heavily characterized by couplets. Triplets, A, B, 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 C, C, C. Alternating rhyme, or sometimes called cross rhyme, A, B, C, D, C, D. Enclosed rhyme, or sometimes referred to as envelope rhyme, A, B, A, C, D, C. And sometimes we need to use many words to describe a rhyme scheme, such as alternating rhymed sestet of ABC, ABC. That describes the stanza type, the sestet, and the rhyme scheme of ABC, ABC. In our example, roses are red, violets are blue, sugar is sweet, and so are you. We see that B are the lines that are rhymed, and we can mark red and sweet as A and C, or we can mark it as blanks with the X, XA, XA. Let's look at Sir Thomas Wyatt the Elder's poem, Stand Whoso List upon the Slipper Wheel. Stand whoso list upon the slipper wheel of high estate, and let me here rejoice, and use my life in quietness each deal. Unknown in court that hath the wanton toys, in hidden place my time shall slowly pass, and when my years be passed without a noise, let me die old after the common trace, for gripes of death doth he too hardly pass, that no one is to all, but to himself, alas, he dieth unknown, dazed with dreadful face. This stanza, this poem is a single unit of 10 lines. It's not a sonnet, but we could say that it is a 10-line poem with this rhyme scheme. A, B, CB, CB, D, C, C, D. And if we divide it into its feet, we see stand who, so list, upon, the slip, per wheel, as the 5 feet of the first line, and the pattern ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum comes forward. We can mark the stresses in this way. Usually the unstressed lines are not marked, but if you want to, you could put that little slack hanging mark like you would see above the second syllable in the first line, who. Now notice also that the first line has a trochee, so we don't say stand who, so list, we say stand who, so list, which creates a dipping effect. In order to understand the poetry, we need to look at the grammar, as I said before. So I've marked on this slide the subject or subject phrases in green, the verbs in red, the direct objects in blue, and indirect objects or prepositional phrases in purple. Now, somebody could quibble about the exactness of these markings. I'm merely using them to show how we can receive the meaning of the poem by recognizing its grammar on the whole. So whosoever desires, that person should stand. And where should they stand? Upon the slipper wheel of high estate. Whoever lists should let me. Should let me do what? We'll talk about that in a moment. And then the next subject is my time, and my time will do something. It shall pass, and it shall pass in a hidden place. Again, we are asking someone to let me do something. Then we refer to a general person in the audience. He doth pass. Who doth pass? We'll talk about that in a moment also. And he also dieth. If we rearrange the syntax, this is what we get. Whoso list, stand upon the slipper wheel of high estate. If that's what you want to do, stand there. And if you do that, let me do what? Let me rejoice here and use my life in quietness, each deal, each moment, unknown in court. Let me stand here obscure, in obscurity, in the court. And what kind of a place is the court? It's a place that hath the wanton toys. It's a place where frivolity, vice perhaps abounds. And the speaker is saying, if you want to stand on the slippery wheel of high society, do that, but let me rejoice in obscurity. My time shall slowly pass in a hidden place, and when my years be passed without noise, without a bunch of intrigue and nonsense and chaos, my time shall pass. Let me die old after the common trace, not young because I was executed. So the sentiment is, let me die old in my old age peacefully, which is common to all humanity, rather than, which is implied, it's not come out, the speaker doesn't come out and say it, rather than die because I was unfavored by the Lord who had me executed, or somebody jealous in court plotted my murder, whatever the case may be. And then the third thought in the poem refers to a general person out there somewhere, probably among the readers. He that known is to all, he that everybody knows, he passes too hardly for gripes of death, but he dieth unknown to himself, alas, dazed with dreadful face. What does too hardly for gripes of death mean? He that is known to everybody does pass with great difficulty for the grips of death. The idea is that life is full of, we might say, stress. Stress might not even be powerful enough word to describe what's happening here, but dies or even lives life in the heavy anxiety of wondering, is my place in court secure? Does the Lord still love me? Not the Lord like God, the Lord God, but does the Lord of the manor, does the Lord of the castle, does the Lord of the realm love me? That person dies not just with this difficulty, but he dies unknown to himself. Whereas the speaker is unknown to others, at least he knows himself. The one who dies in the intrigues of court dies unknown to himself, dazed, with a dreadful face. And one could think of being executed, and that's probably something that Sir Thomas Wyatt has in mind. It may not be only ever thought of in that way, but that is one of the shades of meaning in the poem. So we can also turn those prepositional phrases, relative clauses, we can parse out their grammar too, right? I rejoice, I use my life in quietness, I am unknown in court, my years are passed without noise, I die old in the usual way, and he that is known to everybody else, he passes too hardly for the grips of death, but he dies unknown. Unknown to who? Unknown to himself. There's also the implication that the court never really knew who he was, and he's also dazed, and his face is dreadful. Let's return back to the poem and read it in its actual form with the knowledge of grammar that we have. Stand, whoso list, upon the slipper wheel of high estate, and let me here rejoice, and use my life in quietness each deal, unknown in court that hath the wanton toys. In hidden place my time shall slowly pass, and when my years be passed without noise, let me die old after the common trace, for gripes of death he too hardly pass, that known is to all, but to himself, alas, he dieth unknown, dazed with dreadful face. Let's move on now to Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, and his poem, Love That Doth Reign and Live Within My Thought. Love that doth reign and live within my thought, and build his seat within my captive breast, clad in the arms wherein with me he fought, oft in my face he doth his banner rest. But she that taught me love and suffer pain, my doubtful hope and ache, my hot desire, with shamefaced look to shadow and refrain, her smiling grace converteth straight to ire, and coward love then to the heart apace taketh his flight where he doth lurk and plain, his purpose lost, and dare not show his face. For my lord's guilt thus faultless bide I pain, yet from my lord shall not my foot remove. Sweet is the death that taketh end by love. We can map out the rhyme scheme in this way, A, B, C, D, C, D, and we see this crossed rhyme pattern with a final rhymed couplet, remove and love, which in early modern English would have been exact rhyme, not a near rhyme. And we can also group these crossed rhyme groupings into units. So we have 4 cross-rhymed units, A, B, 4 lines rather, and then C, D, E, C, and F. And so it creates these nice little packages of meaning. And the punctuation also helps. Early modern poetry is not always punctuated, and so sometimes you have to use these techniques in order to find where complete thoughts are. And often the rhyme scheme will help you do that. And then we can identify the feet and the stress marks. Love that doth reign and live within my thought. So we see that even though there's a trochee at the beginning of the line, predominantly we're looking at an iambic pattern. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 feet in each line. 5 is penta, so we are looking at iambic pentameter. And if we identify basic subjects, verbs, and objects, and a few indirect objects, here's what we see. We see that love does something. What does he do? He doth rest his banner in my face. So that's our first thought. Love rests his banner in my face. Then we shift to she in contrast to love. She, a few lines are taken to describe who she is, but she does something. She converteth her smiling face to ire. Back to love. Coward love taketh his flight to the heart. Coward love dares not show his face. From there we shift now to the speaker. I bide pain for my Lord's guilt, right? I suffer pain for my Lord's guilt. And who is the Lord? It's love that doth reign and live within my thought. I suffer pain for love, who is my Lord. And then we see that I shall not remove my foot from my Lord. So the speaker, it's almost, you may find it appalling, but the speaker is saying, though I suffer in this way, I shall not remove my foot from love. Now this could be willing, or it could also signal the power of love to make us do things or hold on to decisions that are not always in our best interest. That's not an unusual thought throughout human history. And the last phrase is, sweet is death, which by itself would be very depressing. However, the death that we are talking about is qualified with another phrase, with a relative clause. So we can take this apart, rearrange the wording to make the syntax easier for us. Love, and then in green parentheses, a description of love. He, more description of love in parentheses, often doth rest his banner in my face. But she, and in the parentheses we have descriptions of she. She converteth her smiling grace straight to ire, and coward love taketh his flight to the heart, and dare not show his face. And we can also, in parentheses, identify something that happens in the heart. I bide pain for my Lord's guilt, and I shall not remove my foot from my Lord, yet I shall not remove my foot from my Lord. Sweet is death. Well, what is this love like? This love is that which reigns and lives and builds. And he reigns and lives in my thought, and he builds his seat within my captive breast. Love is also clad in arms. He fought with me in these arms. Excuse me. He fought with me in these arms, these weapons. She, however, comes along. She taught me love. She that taught me some things. Back to love, whenever she converts her smiling face to ire, love takes his flight. He lurks and complains. His purpose is lost when she converts her face to ire. What did she do? She taught me. She taught me what? I suffer love and pain. I shadow and refrain my doubtful hope. I shadow and refrain my hot desire with a shamefaced look. This is what she taught me. This is the kind of suffering that the speaker feels because of not only love building this fortress inside of him, but also because the object of his love is teaching him shame, teaching him pain and suffering because she turns her face to ire, to anger. So if we shift back to the poem as a whole, knowing this, we have a little more understanding of the meaning, and we can go back in its original form and maybe have some insight as we read. Love that doth reign and live within my thought, and build his seat within my captive breast, clad in the arms wherein with me he fought, oft in my face he doth his banner rest. But she that taught me love and suffer pain, my doubtful hope, and ache my hot desire, with shamefaced look to shadow and refrain, her smiling grace converteth straight to ire. And coward love then to the heart apace taketh his flight, where he doth lurk and plain, his purpose lost, and dare not show his face. For my Lord's guilt thus faultless bide I pain, yet from my Lord shall not my foot remove. Sweet is the death that taketh end by love.